Who scuppered the deal between Iran and the West? Well, last week there was enthusiasm on all sides as world powers met with a delegation from Tehran in Geneva. But after 2 days of tough negotiations, all they managed to agree on was that they would meet again in just over a week's time. Well, the French were initially blamed for the hold-up. Here's Laurent Fabius, the foreign minister, neither confirming nor denying that was the case.
Some say that France is isolated. Others say that we're just following blindly. But they're wrong. France is neither isolated nor are we followers. France is independent. France works for peace. We're in the middle of negotiations. We've already made a lot of progress, but we need to achieve something concrete.
Well, earlier today, the US Secretary of State John Kerry denied any rift between world powers. He said Iran didn't want to sign.
The P5+1 was unified on Sunday, on Saturday, when we presented a proposal to the Iranians. And the French signed off on it, we signed off on it, everybody agreed this was a fair proposal. There was unity. But Iran couldn't take it at that particular moment. They weren't able to accept that particular agreement.
So what exactly went wrong? And who's to blame? And are we any closer to an end in the 11-year nuclear standoff between Iran and the West? Well, joining me tonight in Tel Aviv, Meir JAVEDANFAR is a lecturer at the Interdisciplinary Centre in Cellier, Israel. He also co-wrote a biography of the former Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. It's called The Nuclear Sphinx of Tehran. Good evening to you, Meir. Thanks for being with us. Here in the studio with me, Laurie DUNDON is a former senior advisor to the US State Department. It's good to see you again, Laurie. And on my right, Arnaud is a freelance journalist and an international politics specialist. Good to see you as well. I'll start with you, Laurie. I mean, it's been said that this was a sucker's deal. That's what Laurent Fabius, the French foreign minister, said. Israel's prime minister says Iran was being handed the deal of the century. Was this a deal worth saving anyway? Some are saying that Obama, perhaps Washington, was pushing too hard for an agreement at all costs.
There was significant progress made in opening up the discussion about the toughest issues, and no deal is going to be perfect. You know, you're going to have hard, tough compromises going into this at any time because it's been 11 years, and you've continued to see enrichment and developed centrifuges and complications on the technical side. So this was not going to be easy at all. That said, pose the question whether it was worth going into heavy negotiations with potential compromises or doing nothing, or leaving the strategy just to roll forward as is, the clock to keep moving, and potentially end up in a bombing scenario. So was it a good enough deal? There's a very fine margin of error there, and we don't exactly know the final details of the draft. But was it a deal worth going in and talking about seriously? I think so.
Arnaud, were the French wrong, if it was indeed the French who scuppered this deal, were they wrong to do so?
Well, maybe in that case we can think about a strategy with a good cop and bad cop, and indeed Laurent Fabius has decided to agree on being the bad cop. In the last 10 years, negotiations have never been that far regarding the issue of nuclear bomb and Iran. So we will be only able to know if if France's strategy was a good one only in the next days. If Iran agrees to as we already saw with the IAEA, is Iran agrees to open and to make more compromises. In that case, France's strategy would have been a good one. But right now, most of the...
So you're relating because the IAEA, the head of the IAEA is in Tehran now, and Iran has agreed to allow some more access, not complete unfettered access, but some more access. But do you think that's because of the pressure put on Iran at the weekend?
Perhaps, but in any case, it's a sign of a goodwill from Iran, and it's a first step. But now the international community, and especially the P5+1, must show good sign as well. And for the moment, we still don't see it happening. All
right. Meir JAVEDANFAR, I'd like to get your view on this, given that you wrote a book about the previous president. Hassan Rouhani is a very different man. Everyone's been talking about it. He's really spearheading this rapprochement, if you like, with the West. Do you think there is genuine hope of a deal this time, even if it wasn't the one that was mooted this weekend?
I think there is definitely hope this time. President Rouhani, we can't compare him to President Ahmadinejad in terms of his approach to the international community. I mean, let's just give an example. In 2007, President Sarkozy tried to meet with the Iranian supreme leader. Not only was it scuppered, they didn't allow it to happen. Prime Minister Ahmadinejad wrote an insulting letter to President Sarkozy. You can't imagine that happening with Mr. Rouhani. His team is far more experienced and far more apt at dealing with international issues. However, the stumbling block, one of the stumbling blocks, seems to have been the Arak site, the heavy water reactor site. And this is something that's really worrying for the international community, because if Iran is building this site while it's talking, it's retaining the option to one day to make a bomb from the plutonium from this site. And we want to put a stop on the clock while we're talking to the Iranians. Now, you could say it's only 6 months. We're only talking with the Iranians 6 months. So what can Iran do with Iraq in 6 months? That's true, but we have to remember in 2003, the talks, the first stage, lasted 2 years. And if, in this case, the talks take 2 years and Iran is building Iraq, by the time the first stage finishes, with all the negotiations we have to go through, Iran will be close to a bomb. And we can't have that situation. This is why it's an important issue for Iran to stop building. It's not just the inspection of Iraq, it's the building of Iraq, because the inspection is not going to help once it's completed. We have to stop it right now, reach an agreement over the site about what will happen to the reprocessed fuel, which could be used to make a weapon, and then you can reach a deal.
Why do you think the Iranians are reluctant to abandon building Arak, this heavy water site, this site that could potentially produce plutonium?
Well, there's one thing is that everybody tries to retain their bargaining chips. It's a bargaining chip. Both sides, this is what negotiators do. The West does it, Iran does it. It's very natural that you try to hold on to your cards and not to give them away, because Iraq is an important card. But at the same time, based on Iran's behavior for the last 11 years, it can be suspected that Iran wants to retain the option of making a weapon. And it seems that Ayatollah Khamenei doesn't want to give that up at the moment.
Right, and Laurie Dundon, this brings us to the heart of the matter, doesn't it? Because Iran does have the right to have a civilian nuclear program, doesn't it? To produce nuclear energy for its citizens. It does not have the right to build a nuclear bomb. That is something that everyone is struggling with at the moment.
And the question in between, the degree of enrichment for the capability to move towards a weapon when and if they decide to do so. So, yes, and I agree completely on the conversation about Iraq, that is such a serious issue that may have been toughened up in the Western or P5+1 deal throughout the Friday, Saturday rigmarole. And that may have been something that coming in with a tougher deal on late Saturday afternoon or on Saturday compared to Friday, that was a no-go that may have caused Iranians to break a little bit.
The Americans, the British, the Russians and everyone else were prepared to allow the Iranians to continue to develop Arak, whereas the French were the ones that stood in the way and said, no, this is not acceptable, this is a deal breaker for us.
The reports are that France said, you have to stop building, whereas the original position was more along the way of not moving it online, but you can continue to construct. These types of details and nuance, we have to remember, there may have been multiple drafts moving throughout the day, and these were hours and hours and hours of negotiation. So we're not sure exactly how those details played out. We have piecemeal reports. But I do think the Iraq issue is a central issue and is a central issue of concern. And that may be why, the P5+1 were able to come to agreement amongst themselves to say, okay, let's go tougher on this. And that coordination is essential. There may have been some bumps in the road with France being a little louder than the others on Friday and saying, no, we're going to hold a hard line. The coordination has been a key part of the success of the strategy towards Iran.
So John Kerry and Laurent Fabius, there's no bad feelings there today?
I think there may have been why didn't we talk well last week, but we've been talking really well for the last few years. So let's figure it out. And that's what they tried to do in a rush between Friday and Saturday. Let's get our heads together again, because this only works if we can pull it off together.
Okay, and yes, Arnaud.
Yeah, France's strategy is actually pretty risky for 3 reasons, in my opinion. First, it may strengthen the hardliners of the Iranian regime, who were not really in favor of discussions with international community. In the last months, Ayatollah Khamenei told those hardliners not to speak too loud. But if no agreement is reached, we can imagine that the hardliners of the Iranian regime are going to feel strengthened by that. Secondly, it's also stopping the cooling down with Iran that only started a few months ago when Hassan Rouhani was elected. If there's no agreement, if the diplomacy is not working well, we can imagine that no agreement is going to be found with Iran on Syria or on the other hot topics of the region. And the third region, while it is a bit risky, is that France, as having the toughest position within the P5+1, France is only aligned with Israel and with Benjamin Netanyahu, who was criticizing
and
even
the right-wing Americans.
And the right-wing Americans, who are criticizing even the idea of negotiating with
their
Iran.
Position,
so,
well, they're not against negotiation, as far as I understand it. They're against Iran enriching any uranium. That's what Netanyahu's point is. Iran must not be allowed to enrich uranium at all.
Can I just pick up very, very quickly the mention of the hardliners, both in the Iran but also in the U.S.? We have to be careful to overestimate that the U.S. leadership wanted this. They were so thirsty for it that they would have taken a weak deal because they could not have sold a weak deal at home. Congress, the hard line in Congress still holds a whole lot of leverage over strict sanctions. So whatever Washington agreed to, they had to be able to sell it at home. So I'm a little skeptical that they would have given away something too weak.
Meir, just to bring you in on that point, the issue of enriching uranium is also key to this, isn't it? Because since 2006, Iran has not been allowed to enrich uranium. It has been enriching uranium. It now has a stockpile of uranium at that 20% level. That's the one the Israeli Prime Minister was warning about at the UN last year. It's very, very easy to move that to 80% quite quickly. That's what he's been saying. But now it seems that the position from the West is Iran can enrich uranium, but just to between 3.5% and 5%.
Correct, absolutely correct. This seems to be the consensus. It's not a negotiation position, because as my colleague said rightly so in the office, that we don't know what was happening exactly in these negotiations, but this seems to be the consensus issue. On the issue of France being seen as being an ally of the State of Israel, I actually think Prime Minister Netanyahu should not think that France is going to be his permanent ally. Because Netanyahu does not want any enrichment on Iranian soil, nothing. He wants the whole program shut down, completely dismembered, and then shipped out of Iran. And this does not seem to be the position of France in the long term. So although for now the government may seem to be in step with Prime Minister Netanyahu, I think this is a temporary alliance.
Is this world leaders just playing to their own domestic audiences then? Do you think that Hassan Rouhani will go back to Iran, or will be in Iran, and he will look good today? He's not looking bad following this weekend's negotiations.
I actually think that after saying no in the last round of negotiations, this is going to give him credibility in Iran with the hardliners. It's going to give him a street cred, if you want to put it that way. And this is going to be he can use that to negotiate and even in the future offer compromises, because he could say, look, we weren't too keen, we are negotiating from a position of strength. So this may actually help him in the long run.
All right, now the other part of the deal, what we know about the deal, is about allowing access to the sites. I think we've got a map, and I think we can look at all the nuclear facilities that we know about in Iran. And of course, the West is pushing very hard to allow the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, to have access to all of these sites. The issue of Parchin today is a big sticking point. Iran, Laurie, for the time being, is saying, no, there won't be any access to Parchin, which is, we should point out, is, there we go, there's the map. You can see all the nuclear signs there. Those are all the nuclear facilities that Iran has that are known about. The one close to Tehran is called Parchin. Since 2005, the international community has been demanding access to this site. They haven't been allowed in.
I think we're seeing across the board the fact that the deal under discussion is not quite as far as any of Iran's obligations, and it's not quite as far as we would want to really be confident that they won't have the capacity to go towards weapon. It's part of the way they're on centrifuges. It's part of the way they're on stockpiles. It's, Iraq is extremely concerning because there's kind of no halfway on that one to give, and it's part of the way they're on transparency. But it's moving. It's moving. And the IAEA agreement, I think, today is very encouraging because, again, it tests the goodwill. It tests whether some of the work can begin to be done in these months. The negotiations, the talks will go on for 6 months, or as our colleague mentioned, perhaps even drag on longer. But what work can be done in that time period where the doors are open? So inspect something, start pushing, start getting people on the ground.
It's the beginning of the process rather than the end game.
And get as much as you can while you're slowing the clock.
All right. Now, we've got another guest joining us now from Washington. Former White House official Lawrence J. HAAS. He's also a senior fellow for the organisation US Foreign Policy. Thank you for being with us here on the France 24 debate. I hope you've been hearing a little about what's been going on. We're talking about this deal. It failed at the weekend. Was it a deal worth saving in the first place?
Well, I should tell you, first of all, that I haven't been able to listen to anything that's been said so far because we were having technical problems. So I apologize if I'm repeating anything that has been said or if I'm contradicting something that's been said. But I'll give you my short take on it, which is that the deal fell apart because we continue to have irreconcilable differences about some pretty basic things. I don't really know how close they came. After all, the hardline view in the West is that for any sanctions relief to be provided, the Iranians not only need to freeze what they're doing, but in essence start moving in the other direction and give something up. And while some of the negotiators clearly felt that they were willing to accept Iranian promises to do things, there were others that said, no, actually, we need to be able to not just verify what's going to happen, but also that the Iranians need to start talking about actually giving up some things that they have rather than just freezing things. So, sending stockpiles of enriched uranium out of the country as opposed to just converting it temporarily to something else, things like that. So, there are differences of opinion within the Western alliance that's negotiating this deal, and there continue to be, as I said before, basic differences that I don't see reconciled at the moment as to whether the Iranians should be able to continue, for instance, the right of enrichment, which they seem to think that they have, and the West doesn't think that they should.
All right, Lawrence HAAS, it's great to have you with us. We will have another part of the debate after this short break, so do stay with us, and you at home as well. We'll be back in just a few moments. Stay with us.